Supermarket cashier ignores Beyoncé, but when she took off her sunglasses, she fainted. The fluorescent lights of Market Fresh buzzed overhead, casting their harsh glow across Register 7. Jenny Thompson stared at the conveyor belt, watching it move endlessly like a black river. 6 hours into her shift, and her feet felt like they were on fire, despite the expensive insoles she'd invested in last month. "Price check on Register 4, crackled through the intercom, making her wince. The constant noise of the supermarket had been giving her headaches lately, but she couldn't afford to take time off. Not now. Not with everything going on. "Jenny, could you cover Karen's register during her break?" Mr. Peterson, her supervisor, appeared beside her with his ever-present clipboard. "Sure," she replied automatically, though inside she was screaming. Another register meant more standing, more scanning, more fake smiling. "You okay? You look a little pale," he noted, actually looking concerned for once. Jenny forced a smile. "Just tired, didn't sleep much." "Your mom?" he asked quietly, knowing some of her situation. She nodded, remembering the previous night, the way her mother had coughed for hours, how the medication didn't seem to help anymore. The stack of medical bills on their kitchen table kept growing, mocking their empty bank account. "Need to talk about it?" "No, I'm good," Jenny lied, turning back to her register as another customer approached. "Mr. Peterson lingered for a moment before walking away, his shoes squeaking against the freshly waxed floor. "Paper or plastic?" Jenny asked the elderly woman who had just placed her items on the belt. Mrs. Rodriguez. She'd been coming to the store every Tuesday for as long as Jenny could remember. "Oh, Jenny, dear, you look exhausted," Mrs. Rodriguez commented, her kind eyes crinkling with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Just one of those days," Jenny replied, carefully scanning the woman's usual items: cat food, bread, milk, and her favorite brand of coffee. "Those days seem to be happening more often lately," Mrs. Rodriguez observed. "How's your mother?" Jenny's hands trembled slightly as she scanned the coffee. "She's managing." "The treatments aren't working?" "They're working," Jenny said quickly, maybe too quickly. "Just slowly. That'll be 1,027.84. Mrs. Rodriguez handed over her credit card, still watching Jenny with those knowing eyes. "You know, my church group has a fund for families in need." "We're fine, really." Jenny cut her off, perhaps a bit too sharply. She softened her tone. "But thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez, you're very kind." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, the day continued its relentless march forward. Scan, bag, repeat. The monotony was almost comforting. It kept her from thinking too much about home, about the phone call she'd received from the hospital this morning, about additional tests they wanted to run. Tests that insurance wouldn't cover. "Hey, Jenny," Sarah from the deli counter called out during a rare lull. "We're ordering pizza for lunch. Want in?" Jenny's stomach growled at the thought, but she shook her head. "Brought my lunch today." A peanut butter sandwich and an apple. The same lunch she'd been bringing for weeks now. Every dollar saved meant another dollar for Mom's medications. "Come on, it's Mario's Pizza," Sarah tempted, knowing it was Jenny's favorite. "Maybe next time," Jenny replied, turning away to straighten the candy display by her register. The morning crawled by, marked by the steady stream of customers, the usual mix of harried mothers with screaming children, business people grabbing quick lunches, teenagers buying energy drinks and snacks. Jenny rang them all up mechanically, her mind wandering to the conversation she'd had with her mother that morning. "Baby, maybe it's time we talked about options," her mom had said, her voice weak but determined. "What options?" Jenny had asked, though she knew what was coming. "The house. We could sell it. Move into something smaller." "Mom, no. This is our home. Dad built this house." "Your father would want us to be practical," her mom had countered, before another coughing fit took over. Jenny blinked back tears at the memory, forcing herself to focus on the present. A young man was trying to buy cigarettes without ID, and she welcomed the distraction of the ensuing argument. "Sir, I need to see your ID. It's store policy." "Come on, I buy them here all the time." "Not from me, you don't. No ID, no cigarettes." The man stormed off, muttering under his breath. Jenny didn't care. Let him complain to management. Mr. Peterson knew she followed the rules. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably the hospital again. They'd been calling all morning about the payment plan, but she couldn't deal with that now. Not here, not during her shift. Jenny? Lisa, the new girl from Register 5, approached nervously. I'm having trouble with my register. It keeps giving me an error message when I try to process EBT cards. Jenny suppressed a sigh. Did you try rebooting it? No. Okay, let me show you. Jenny glanced at her line, empty for the moment, and followed Lisa to her register. As she explained the procedure, she caught a glimpse of herself in the security mirror overhead. Dark circles under her eyes, hair hastily pulled back in a messy ponytail, uniform slightly wrinkled because she hadn't had time to iron it properly. When had she started looking so? Tired? Back at her own register, Jenny checked the time. 2 p.m. 4 more hours to go. Her feet throbbed in protest and she shifted her weight, trying to find a position that hurt less. The motion sent a sharp pain through her lower back, another souvenir from too many hours standing. Price check on Register 7, she called out wearily, holding up a package of organic mushrooms that wouldn't scan. As she waited for someone from produce to respond, she remembered she needed to pick up her mother's prescriptions after work. The pharmacy closed at 7, she'd have to rush. A young mother with twins approached her register, both children crying over denied candy requests. Jenny managed a genuine smile for the first time that day. The twins reminded her of herself and her brother when they were young, before the accident that took him and their father. They're beautiful, Jenny commented, as she rang up the woman's groceries. The mother looked frazzled but proud. Thank you. They're usually better behaved, but someone skipped their nap today. I used to throw tantrums in this very store, Jenny shared. My mom still tells stories about it. The woman laughed, and for a moment, Jenny felt a connection. Two people sharing a simple human moment amid the fluorescent lights and beeping scanners. After the mother and twins left, Jenny's register display flickered ominously. No, she muttered. Not today. She couldn't deal with technical issues today. But the machine cooperated, settling back to its normal display after a few seconds. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she snuck a quick glance at the screen. Not the hospital, worse. A text from her mother. Feeling very tired today. Don't worry about picking up dinner. Jenny's heart clenched. Don't worry from her mother always meant worry a lot. She quickly typed back, I'll bring soup from that place you like. Rest. Love you. The rest of the afternoon continued its slow crawl. Jenny rang up countless items, handled minor customer complaints, fixed a paper jam in her receipt printer. Normal day-to-day problems that usually didn't bother her but today felt overwhelming. Jenny? Mr. Peterson appeared again. Your break's in 15 minutes. Want me to make it sooner? You really don't look good. She shook her head. I'm fine. Really. Just need to make it through today. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Look, if you need some extra hours this week. Thank you. She cut him off. But I'm okay, really. He didn't believe her, she could tell. But what could she say? That her mother's cancer had come back worse than before? That the insurance was denying coverage for the new treatment her doctors recommended? That she lay awake at night trying to figure out how to make minimum wage stretch far enough to cover mortgage payments and medical bills? A customer cleared their throat, and Jenny realized she'd been staring into space. Back to work. Scan, bag, repeat. The rhythm of it was almost hypnotic, letting her mind drift while her hands moved automatically. She thought about the letter she'd received yesterday from the community college, offering her a spot in their nursing program, another dream she'd have to defer. Even with financial aid, she couldn't afford the tuition. Not now, maybe not ever. The afternoon rush was starting to pick up. More customers filed into her line, many of them regulars she knew by sight, if not by name. The lawyer who always bought the same turkey sandwich and apple. The high school teacher with her healthy snacks for her students. the construction worker who came in for energy drinks and protein bars. Jenny rang them all up, exchanging the expected pleasantries, playing her part in their daily routines while trying to ignore the growing ache in her feet and the pounding in her head. "Price check on Register 7. She called out again, this time for an unmarked package of what looked like fancy imported cheese. As she waited, she watched the other customers in her line. A woman in expensive workout gear checking her phone, an elderly man counting out change for his purchase, a tall figure in black at the end of the line, wearing sunglasses despite being indoors. Just another day at Market Fresh. Just another shift to get through. Just another step in the endless dance of surviving. Little did Jenny know that her ordinary day was about to become anything but ordinary. For now, though, she just kept scanning items, trying to ignore her aching feet and the weight of worry pressing down on her shoulders. 4 more hours to go. She could make it. She had to make it. There wasn't any other choice. Register closed after next customer. The electronic sign above her station announced automatically as her break time approached. Jenny glanced at the line, relieved to see it wasn't too long. Maybe she'd actually get her break on time today. Maybe she'd have a chance to call the hospital back, to try to figure out some kind of payment plan that wouldn't leave them completely broke. Maybe. But first, there were groceries to scan, customers to serve, moments to get through one at a time. Because that's what you did when life got hard. You kept going, kept scanning, kept breathing, one item at a time, one customer at a time, one moment at a time. And somewhere in the back of her mind, as she reached for the next item on her conveyor belt, Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She just didn't know what, or how, or why. Not yet. A young woman approached with a cart full of organic produce, catching Jenny's attention not because of who she was, but because of the sheer amount of groceries. "If you're about to go on break, I can wait for another register," the woman offered kindly, noticing the register closing sign. Jenny shook her head. "No, it's fine. I can take your order." She could always delay her break a few minutes. It wouldn't be the first time. As she began scanning the items, her phone buzzed again in her pocket. The hospital's number flashed on her screen through her apron, and her hands trembled slightly as she picked up a bunch of organic kale. "Are you all right?" the customer asked, her voice gentle and concerned. "Yes, sorry," Jenny mumbled, accidentally scanning the kale twice. "Let me void that." Mr. Peterson appeared again, hovering nearby. "Jenny, you should take your break now." "Just finishing up with this customer," she replied, continuing to scan items mechanically. Organic quinoa, gluten-free crackers, almond milk, the kind of groceries she could never afford. The fluorescent lights seemed to grow brighter, making her head pound even more. She'd forgotten to eat anything since that morning's hastily grabbed piece of toast. The world swayed slightly, but she gripped the edge of her register and steadied herself. "Jenny?" Mr. Peterson's voice seemed to come from far away. "I'm fine," she insisted, though the words felt thick in her mouth. "Just need to finish this order." Her phone buzzed again, and again. The hospital was persistent today. A jar of honey slipped from her fingers, but the customer caught it with surprisingly quick reflexes. "Maybe you should listen to your manager," the woman suggested, her face hidden behind large sunglasses. Jenny forced a smile. Almost done, just a few more items. The store's background noise seemed to grow louder, the beeping of registers, the squeak of shopping cart wheels, the distant chatter of customers, the endless loop of supermarket music. It all swirled together in a cacophony that made her head spin. Another buzz from her phone. This time, she couldn't help but pull it out, just for a second. A text from her neighbor. "Your mom's coughing really bad. Should I call someone?" The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto her register's counter. The room tilted dangerously. "I really think you should sit down," the customer said, reaching out as if to steady her. Jenny tried to focus on the register display, but the numbers were swimming before her eyes. How much sleep had she gotten last night? 3 hours? 2? Between her mother's coughing and her own worries, she'd mostly just stared at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating bills in her head. "Water," Mr. Peterson was saying. "Someone get her some water." "I just need a minute," Jenny protested, but her voice sounded strange to her own ears. The lights were definitely too bright now, creating halos around everything she looked at. Sarah from the deli counter appeared with a bottle of water. "Here, drink this. You look like you're about to pass out." Jenny reached for the bottle, but her hand wouldn't cooperate. The room was spinning faster now, the fluorescent lights creating strobing patterns behind her eyes. "I'm sorry," she managed to whisper to her customer. "I just need to." But she never finished the sentence. The world tilted one final time, the lights grew blindingly bright, and then everything faded to black. The last thing she heard was the sound of her scanner beeping plaintively, still waiting for the next item that would never come. As consciousness slipped away, Jenny's last coherent thought wasn't about falling, or about the customer whose order she hadn't finished, or even about her job. It was about her mother, alone at home, probably worried sick about why her daughter wasn't answering her phone. Then even that thought faded away, and Jenny Thompson, the tired cashier from Register 7, finally got the rest her body had been desperately demanding, though not quite in the way anyone would have expected. The automatic doors of Market Fresh slid open with their familiar whoosh, barely noticed among the afternoon bustle. A tall woman entered, her presence somehow both commanding and deliberately understated. Her all-black ensemble, designer leggings, an oversized hoodie, and large sunglasses spoke of someone who preferred to blend into the background, despite the obvious quality of her clothing. "Welcome to Market Fresh," called out Tommy, the elderly greeter offering a cart. The woman nodded graciously, accepting it with manicured hands that bore several tasteful rings. As she pushed her cart through the produce section, other shoppers barely gave her a second glance. This was Beverly Hills adjacent. Well-dressed people were hardly a novelty. Still, there was something about her deliberate movements, the way she carefully selected each item, that suggested someone used to attention trying very hard to avoid it. "Excuse me," a young stock boy approached her. "Would you like help reaching the organic mangoes? They're fresh in this morning." The woman shook her head politely but didn't speak, instead pointing to the items she wanted. The stock boy placed them carefully in her cart, trying not to stare at the designer bag casually slung over her shoulder. Moving through the aisles, she filled her cart methodically. Organic vegetables, whole grain breads, premium juices, and an impressive array of healthy snacks. Her selections were careful, precise, as if following a specific meal plan. "Oh my God," whispered a teenage girl to her friend near the cereal aisle. "Doesn't she look like—" "Shh," her friend cut her off. "Everyone in LA looks like somebody." The woman in black seemed to smile slightly behind her glasses. Turning down another aisle, her phone buzzed, and she answered it quietly, keeping her voice low. "Yes, I'll be home soon. No, just picking up a few things. Tell her mommy misses her." A few shoppers nearby perked up at her voice. There was something familiar about it, something they couldn't quite place. But the woman had already moved on, her cart rolling smoothly toward the gluten-free section. "Ma'am," called out an enthusiastic sample vendor, "would you like to try our new organic energy bars? There." The woman raised a hand politely but firmly, declining without words. Her cart was nearly full now, a healthy assortment that would have made any nutritionist proud. Near the dairy section, she paused to check her phone again. A young mother with a crying baby walked past, looking frazzled. Without hesitation, the woman in black reached into her cart and pulled out a pack of organic teething biscuits she'd just selected. "Here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "These might help." The mother started to protest, but something in the stranger's gentle demeanor made her accept the gift. "Thank you," she said. "That's so kind." The woman nodded and moved on, her cart wheels squeaking slightly on the freshly waxed floor. As she approached the checkout area, she surveyed the lines, looking for the shortest one. "Register 7 is open," called out a helpful staff member, pointing to where Jenny stood, focused on her current customer. The woman in black observed Jenny for a moment, the tired slump of her shoulders, the mechanical movements of someone who had been standing too long. She recognized that exhaustion, remembered her own days of working long hours before fame changed everything. As she waited in line, she noticed Jenny's hands trembling slightly as she handled items. The cashier was pale, too pale, and seemed to be fighting to stay upright. "Maybe you should take a break," she heard the manager say to Jenny. "I'm fine," Jenny insisted, though she clearly wasn't. The woman in black watched with growing concern as Jenny struggled through the previous customer's order. She'd seen enough people push themselves too hard to recognize the signs of someone at their limit. When it was finally her turn, she started to suggest going to another register, seeing how unwell Jenny looked. "If you're about to go on break, I can wait for another register." But Jenny insisted on taking her order, even as her hands shook while scanning the first few items. The woman in black watched carefully, her musician's ear picking up the slight tremor in Jenny's voice, the way her breathing seemed too shallow. She caught the jar of honey when it slipped from Jenny's grasp, her reflexes, honed by years of choreographed performances, acting automatically. "Maybe you should listen to your manager," she suggested gently, but Jenny seemed determined to continue. From behind her sunglasses, the woman observed as Jenny grew paler, her movements becoming more unsteady. When the phone clattered onto the counter, she instinctively reached out to help, recognizing the signs of someone about to faint. She'd seen it before: backup dancers pushing too hard, crew members working too long, the human cost of trying to do too much for too long. Her security team had trained her to recognize medical emergencies, and this was rapidly becoming one. "I really think you should sit down," she said, her natural instinct to help overwhelming her usual desire to remain anonymous. She started to reach for her sunglasses, thinking clearly seeing her face might help Jenny focus. But before she could, the young cashier's eyes rolled back, and she began to crumple. The woman in black moved quickly, designer bag forgotten as she reached across the register to try to break Jenny's fall. "Someone call for help," she called out, her distinctive voice carrying across the store. Her sunglasses slipped slightly in the commotion, and she felt them start to fall. In that moment, she had to make a choice: catch her glasses or help catch Jenny. It wasn't really a choice at all. The sunglasses clattered to the floor as she helped ease Jenny's collapse, revealing a face that would have been instantly recognizable to anyone in the store if they hadn't all been focused on the unconscious cashier. "Give her space," she commanded, using the same voice that could control stadiums of fans. "Does anyone know if she has any medical conditions?" The manager appeared with water, looking startled as he finally registered who was kneeling beside his employee. Ms. Knowles Carter. The girl needs help." She cut him off firmly. "What's her emergency contact information?" As the store erupted into chaos around them, Beyoncé Knowles Carter, for that's who the woman in black was, stayed focused on the unconscious cashier. Celebrity meant nothing in moments like these. Right now, she wasn't a superstar or an icon. She was just someone trying to help another human being in need. But that revelation and its consequences would have to wait. For now, Jenny needed help, and that was all that mattered. The manager fumbled with his phone, trying to both call for medical assistance and process the fact that Beyoncé was kneeling on his store floor. Other customers began to notice, whispers spreading through the store like wildfire. "Oh my God, is that? It can't be." I knew she looked familiar. But Beyoncé ignored them all, focused entirely on Jenny. She'd been to enough concerts, seen enough people faint from excitement or exhaustion, to know what to do. She checked Jenny's breathing, made sure she was in a safe position, and, most importantly, kept others from crowding too close. "Sir," she addressed the manager firmly, "I assume you have her emergency contact information?" Yes, he stammered, still staring. "Her mother. But she's sick. She can't." Beyoncé's expression softened with understanding. "Is there somewhere more private we can take her, away from all these phones?" Indeed, customers had begun pulling out their phones, trying to capture the surprising scene. Beyoncé's security team would be having fits if they knew where she was. She'd slipped away from them for what was supposed to be a quick, anonymous grocery run. The break room, the manager suggested, finally snapping into action. Through those doors. "Can someone help me move her?" Beyoncé asked, looking around at the gathering crowd. Two male employees stepped forward, carefully lifting Jenny while Beyoncé supported her head. As they moved toward the break room, Beyoncé could hear the whispers following them, feel the phones recording their progress, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the young woman who'd clearly been pushing herself too hard for too long. She'd seen that look before, in the mirror, in her early days with Destiny's Child, when ambition and necessity pushed you beyond your limits. She'd been lucky. She'd had people looking out for her. Looking at Jenny's pale face, she wondered who was looking out for her. The break room was mercifully empty and private. They laid Jenny on a worn couch, and Beyoncé immediately began loosening her collar, elevating her feet with a cushion. "Has this happened before?" she asked the manager, who was hovering nervously nearby. "No, but she's been working so hard lately. Her mother's sick, cancer I think, and Jenny's been trying to handle everything herself." Beyoncé nodded, understanding all too well the weight of family responsibilities. She'd been blessed with the resources to help when her own family faced health challenges. Looking at Jenny, she suspected those resources weren't available here. "Should we call an ambulance?" someone asked. "Let's wait a moment," Beyoncé suggested, noting Jenny's color improving slightly. Sometimes all the body needs is a chance to rest. She stayed by Jenny's side, holding her hand, remembering all the times she'd pushed herself too hard, all the times she'd seen others do the same. Success had given her the luxury of choice, but she'd never forgotten what it was like before, when choice wasn't an option. Her phone buzzed, probably her security team realizing she'd given them the slip, but that could wait. Right now, she was exactly where she needed to be, helping someone who needed it. The manager returned with Jenny's emergency contact information, looking apologetic. "Her mother. She's in treatment today. I tried calling, but—" Beyoncé nodded. "Then we'll be her family for now. Could you get some juice, something with sugar, and maybe some crackers?" As the manager hurried off, Beyoncé studied Jenny's face. Young, probably mid-20s, with worry lines that shouldn't be there yet. She thought about her own daughter, about the world she wanted her to grow up in, a world where people helped each other, where success meant lifting others up. "The media's going to be all over this," one of the employees whispered to another near the door. "Let them," Beyoncé thought, though she didn't say it aloud. "Let them see what really mattered, not the celebrity doing the helping, but the human connection that made the help necessary." She adjusted the cool compress someone had brought, watching Jenny's eyelids flutter. The young cashier would wake up soon, and then would come the moment of recognition, the inevitable shock. But for now, in this quiet break room, they were just two people, one helping another through a difficult moment. The automatic doors of Market Fresh slid open with their familiar whoosh, barely noticed among the afternoon bustle. A tall woman entered, her presence somehow both commanding and deliberately understated. Her all-black ensemble, designer leggings, an oversized hoodie, and large sunglasses spoke of someone who preferred to blend into the background despite the obvious quality of her clothing. "Welcome to Market Fresh," called out Tommy, the elderly greeter, offering a cart. The woman nodded graciously, accepting it with manicured hands that bore several tasteful rings. As she pushed her cart through the produce section, other shoppers barely gave her a second glance. This was Beverly Hills adjacent, well-dressed people were hardly a novelty. Still, there was something about her deliberate movements, the way she carefully selected each item, that suggested someone used to attention trying very hard to avoid it. "Excuse me," a young stock boy approached her. "Would you like help reaching the organic mangoes? They're fresh in this morning." The woman shook her head politely but didn't speak, instead pointing to the items she wanted. The stock boy placed them carefully in her cart, trying not to stare at the designer bag casually slung over her shoulder. Moving through the aisles, she filled her cart methodically, organic vegetables, whole grain breads, premium juices, and an impressive array of healthy snacks. Her selections were careful, precise, as if following a specific meal plan. "Oh my God," whispered a teenage girl to her friend near the cereal aisle. "Doesn't she look like—" "Shh," her friend cut her off. "Everyone in LA looks like somebody." The woman in black seemed to smile slightly behind her glasses, turning down another aisle. Her phone buzzed, and she answered it quietly, keeping her voice low. "Yes, I'll be home soon. No, just picking up a few things. Tell her mommy misses her." A few shoppers nearby perked up at her voice. There was something familiar about it, something they couldn't quite place. But the woman had already moved on, her cart rolling smoothly toward the gluten-free section. The woman raised a hand politely but firmly, declining without words. Her cart was nearly full now, filled with enough healthy food to feed a small army, or perhaps a very active family. "Register 7 looks shortest," a helpful employee suggested as she approached the front. She nodded in acknowledgement, steering her cart toward Jenny's line. The cashier looked exhausted, her movements mechanical as she scanned items for the customer ahead. The woman in black noticed how Jenny's hands trembled slightly, how she kept blinking as if trying to stay focused. "Next in line," Jenny called out weakly. The woman started unloading her cart, arranging items neatly on the conveyor belt. Her phone buzzed again, probably her security team wondering where she'd disappeared to. She'd only meant to make a quick grocery run, wanting a moment of normalcy away from the constant spotlight. "If you're about to go on break, I can wait for another register," she offered, noting Jenny's pale complexion. "No, it's fine," Jenny insisted, though she looked anything but fine. The woman watched with growing concern as Jenny struggled to scan the items. A jar of honey nearly crashed to the floor, but the woman's quick reflexes, honed by years of dance training, caught it mid-fall. "Maybe you should listen to your manager," she suggested gently, noticing how Jenny swayed slightly. "Almost done," Jenny mumbled, but her voice was barely audible. The woman glanced around, looking for help. She'd seen enough people push themselves too far, backup dancers, crew members, even herself in the early days. She recognized the signs of someone about to collapse. "Water," she heard someone say. "Someone get her some water." But it was too late. Jenny's eyes rolled back, and she started to fall. The woman lunged forward instinctively, her designer sunglasses slipping off in the process. Her only thought was preventing Jenny from hitting her head on the hard floor. "Call for help," she commanded, her distinctive voice finally unmistakable without the glasses to hide behind. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd as recognition dawned. But the woman, now clearly revealed as Beyoncé, remained focused solely on Jenny's unconscious form. "Give her space," she ordered, using her stage voice to control the situation. "Is there somewhere private we can take her?" The manager, finally recovering from his shock, nodded. "The break room, through those doors." As they carefully moved Jenny, Beyoncé could hear the whispers, see the phones being raised to capture the moment. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the young woman who clearly needed help, the kind of help Beyoncé had been lucky enough to receive when she was starting out, when the pressure seemed overwhelming. In the break room, away from prying eyes, Beyoncé stayed by Jenny's side, holding her hand and watching her breathing. The manager hovered nearby, still struggling to process the situation. "She's been working so hard," he explained nervously. "Her mother's sick." Beyoncé nodded, understanding all too well the weight of family responsibilities. She thought about her own mother, about the sacrifices families make for each other. "Get some juice," she instructed, "and something to eat. When she wakes up, she'll need it." As they waited for Jenny to regain consciousness, Beyoncé's phone buzzed repeatedly. Her team would be frantic by now, but that could wait. Some things were more important than schedules and security protocols. She looked at Jenny's face, seeing not just a tired cashier, but a reflection of every person who'd ever pushed themselves too hard trying to take care of others. In that moment, she wasn't Beyoncé the superstar. She was just someone who could help, who needed to help. And as Jenny's eyelids began to flutter, Beyoncé knew that sometimes the biggest moments in life come disguised as small acts of kindness in a supermarket on an ordinary afternoon. The supermarket's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Jenny processed credit card after credit card, her vision becoming increasingly blurry. The woman in black's card was next, another transaction in what felt like an endless day. Card declined, Jenny muttered automatically, barely registering the words leaving her mouth. Her head was spinning, but she forced herself to stay focused. Just one more customer, she told herself. Just get through this. The woman in black seemed to pause, reaching into her designer bag. Let me try another one, she said softly, her voice carrying an oddly familiar timbre that Jenny's foggy brain couldn't quite place. Jenny nodded weakly, watching as the woman's manicured hands searched through her wallet. The sunglasses were still firmly in place, despite the indoor lighting, and something about that triggered a distant memory in Jenny's mind, something about celebrities and their tendency to wear sunglasses indoors. Is everything all right? The woman asked, noticing Jenny's intense stare. Yes, sorry, Jenny mumbled, trying to shake off the strange feeling of déjà vu. It's just your voice. The woman stilled for a moment, her hand pausing in her wallet. Then, with a gentle movement that seemed to happen in slow motion, she reached up to remove her sunglasses. Jenny's world stopped. Time seemed to freeze as she found herself staring into the unmistakable eyes of Beyoncé Knowles Carter. The same eyes she'd seen countless times on magazine covers, in music videos, on television, but now they were real, concerned, and looking directly at her. Oh my. Jenny's voice trailed off as the room began to spin more violently. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to multiply and dance, creating a kaleidoscope effect that made her stomach lurch. Are you all right? Beyoncé asked, her voice now crystal clear and unmistakable without the barrier of sunglasses between them. Jenny tried to respond, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. The register counter seemed to be moving away from her, or maybe she was moving away from it. She couldn't tell anymore. Her knees felt like they were made of jelly, and the persistent buzzing in her ears grew louder. I think she's going to, someone began to say. Jenny's last conscious thought was a bizarre mix of, I'm about to faint in front of Beyoncé, and Mom's going to kill me if I lose this job. Then the world tilted sideways. The lights exploded into 1,000 bright stars, and everything went black. The sensation of falling was strange, like floating and sinking at the same time. She was vaguely aware of movement around her, of voices calling out, of hands reaching to catch her. But it all seemed distant, as if happening in another room or perhaps another world entirely. Someone help! That voice, that famous, impossible voice, seemed to cut through the darkness for a moment. Then there was nothing. The darkness was peaceful, in its way. No registers beeping, no customers demanding, no bills to worry about. Just quiet, just rest. The rest she'd been needing for so long but couldn't afford to take. Somewhere in the darkness, Jenny thought she could hear people talking. Should we call an ambulance? Give her space. Is that really? Everyone back up, please. But none of it seemed important. The darkness was comfortable, welcoming. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jenny didn't have to be strong, didn't have to keep going, didn't have to pretend everything was fine. Time became meaningless in the darkness. It could have been seconds or hours, Jenny couldn't tell, but gradually, awareness began to seep back in. First, physical sensations. Something cool on her forehead, something soft beneath her head, a warm pressure around her hand. Then sounds began to filter through, quiet murmuring, the hum of a vending machine, footsteps on linoleum. The break room, her mind supplied helpfully. She was in the break room. I think she's coming around, someone said. That voice again, that impossible voice that couldn't really be there. Jenny's eyelids felt heavy, but she forced them to open anyway. The break room ceiling came into focus slowly, its water-stained tiles a familiar sight. But the face hovering above her, that was new. That was impossible. Take it easy, Beyoncé said softly, still holding Jenny's hand. You've had quite a moment. Jenny blinked rapidly, certain she was hallucinating. Maybe she'd hit her head when she fell. Maybe this was all some strange dream brought on by exhaustion and stress. Jenny tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. Here, drink this, Beyoncé said, helping her sit up slightly and holding a juice box to her lips. Small sips. Jenny obeyed automatically, still convinced she must be dreaming. The juice was sweet and cold, helping to clear some of the fog from her mind. But as her thoughts became clearer, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She'd fainted. At work, in front of customers, in front of Beyoncé. Oh God, Jenny groaned, trying to sit up fully. I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. Don't be, Beyoncé said firmly, keeping a steadying hand on her shoulder. Everyone has their limits. You've clearly been pushing yours for too long. Jenny's face burned with embarrassment as she tried to process the situation. Here she was, lying on the break room couch, while actual Beyoncé, Queen Bey herself, was holding a juice box for her. I should get back to my register, Jenny mumbled, trying to sit up again. You're not going anywhere, Beyoncé said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Your manager already called someone to cover your shift. Mr. Peterson appeared in the doorway, looking flustered. Jenny, how are you feeling? Should I call your mother? The mention of her mother snapped Jenny fully back to reality. No, please don't. She's at treatment today, and I don't want to worry her. Treatment? Beyoncé asked gently, still holding Jenny's hand. Jenny felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was too much. The exhaustion, the worry, the surreal situation. Cancer, she whispered. Stage 3, the new treatment. Insurance won't cover it. She hadn't meant to say that last part, hadn't meant to reveal so much to a complete stranger, even if that stranger was Beyoncé. But something about the genuine concern in the singer's eyes made the words tumble out. I'm sorry, Jenny said quickly, wiping her eyes. You don't need to hear all this. I'm sure you have places to be. I'm exactly where I need to be, Beyoncé replied, her voice soft but firm. Sometimes the universe puts us in the right place at the right time. A young employee poked his head into the break room. Ms. Knowles-Carter? There are some paparazzi gathering outside. Security wants to know. Let them wait, Beyoncé said, not taking her eyes off Jenny. Tell me about your mother. And somehow, sitting in that dingy break room with its humming vending machine and flickering fluorescent light, Jenny found herself telling Beyoncé everything. About her mother's diagnosis, about the mounting medical bills, about the experimental treatment that could help but cost more than they could ever afford. Jenny's voice cracked. I just don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Working doubles, picking up extra shifts, trying to be there for her treatments. You don't have to do it alone, Beyoncé said, squeezing her hand. There are people who want to help if you let them. Jenny laughed bitterly. The hospital wants payment up front for the new treatment, unless you know someone who has an extra $50,000 lying around. She trailed off, suddenly remembering who she was talking to. Oh God, I wasn't trying to. But Beyoncé was already reaching for her bag, pulling out her phone. What's the name of your mother's doctor? What? No, please, Jenny protested. I wasn't asking for. I could never. Let me tell you something, Beyoncé interrupted, her voice taking on the same commanding tone she used on stage. I believe in signs. And me being here today in this store, at this register, that's a sign. Now, your mother's doctor's name? Jenny found herself giving it, along with the hospital information. She watched in stunned silence as Beyoncé made a call, speaking quietly but firmly to someone about arrangements and payments. It's taken care of, Beyoncé said after hanging up. The hospital will have the payment by tomorrow morning. I can't. Jenny started crying in earnest now. I can't accept this. It's too much. You can and you will, Beyoncé said firmly, but on one condition. What's that? You take better care of yourself. Your mother needs you healthy and strong. Promise me you'll rest when you need to, eat properly, and ask for help when things get too much." Jenny nodded through her tears, still not quite believing this was real. Outside the break room, she could hear the growing commotion as word spread about who was in the store. But in here, in this moment, it wasn't about Beyoncé the superstar. It was about two women, one helping the other through one of life's hardest moments. "Thank you," Jenny whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Pay it forward," Beyoncé replied simply. "When you're able, help someone else who needs it. That's how we make the world better, one person at a time." The break room door opened again, and a worried-looking man in a suit appeared. "B, we really need to go. The crowd outside is getting bigger." Beyoncé nodded but took a moment to write something on a piece of paper. "This is my assistant's number. Call if you need anything, and I mean anything." "And Jenny?" "Yes?" "Your mother's going to be fine, I can feel it." As Beyoncé stood to leave, Jenny caught her hand. "Wait, why? Why help me?" Beyoncé smiled, and in that smile was all the warmth and grace that had made her not just a star but a legend. "Because someone helped me once, when I was young and struggling. And because sometimes angels don't wear wings. Sometimes they wear supermarket uniforms and work too hard trying to save their mothers." With that, she was gone, leaving Jenny on the break room couch with tear-stained cheeks and a piece of paper that would change her life. Outside, she could hear the commotion as Beyoncé left the store, could hear the shouts and camera clicks of the paparazzi who had gathered. But all Jenny could think about was calling her mother, telling her that everything was going to be okay. That sometimes miracles happened in the most ordinary places, like register 7 of a suburban supermarket on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. The break room had never felt smaller than it did in that moment. Jenny sat on the worn couch, her manager hovering nearby, still trying to process what had just happened. But there was someone else there too, someone whose presence made the fluorescent-lit room feel both surreal and somehow sacred. "How are you feeling now?" Beyoncé asked, still sitting on the floor beside her, holding a cold compress to Jenny's forehead. The superstar seemed completely unconcerned about her designer outfit touching the break room's linoleum floor. I'm not sure," Jenny answered honestly, her voice trembling. "This doesn't feel real." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat from the doorway. "Jenny, take as much time as you need. Your shift is covered." But Jenny barely heard him. She was too focused on fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. Not tears of excitement at meeting a celebrity, though that was certainly part of it, but tears of everything else. Everything she'd been holding back for so long. "I'm so sorry," Jenny burst out suddenly, the tears finally breaking free. "I'm sorry for causing all this trouble, for fainting, for ruining your shopping trip." "Stop," Beyoncé said gently but firmly. "Look at me." Jenny looked up, meeting those famous eyes that had stared out from countless magazine covers and music videos. But up close, they weren't the eyes of an icon. They were the eyes of someone who understood suffering, who knew what it meant to carry heavy burdens. "Tell me about your mom," Beyoncé said softly. And just like that, the dam broke. Through her tears, Jenny found herself telling this global superstar about her mother's battle with cancer, about the mounting medical bills, about the nights spent lying awake wondering how to make impossible numbers add up. "She's all I have left," Jenny explained, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "After Dad and my brother. The accident. It's just been us. And now with the cancer back." "Back?" Beyoncé asked, her hand squeezing Jenny's gently. Jenny nodded. "We thought she'd beaten it last year, but it came back worse. The doctors say there's this new treatment, but insurance won't cover it, and we can't afford." She stopped, suddenly embarrassed. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear all this. You probably have places to be." "I'm exactly where I need to be," Beyoncé replied. "Sometimes angels wear sunglasses at supermarkets." Jenny gave a watery laugh. "I can't believe you're really here, that this is really happening." "Life has a way of putting us where we need to be," Beyoncé said, adjusting the cold compress, even if we don't understand it at the time. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Beyoncé's security team looked in apologetically. Ms. Knowles Carter, the paparazzi. "Give us a minute," she replied, not taking her eyes off Jenny. Then, to Jenny, "How much?" "What?" "The treatment. How much does it cost?" Jenny shook her head. No, I wasn't trying to." "How much?" 50,000, Jenny whispered, the number that had been haunting her dreams, but I wasn't asking for. Beyoncé was already pulling out her phone. "What's your mother's doctor's name?" "Dr. Sarah Chan at Memorial Hospital, but please, you can't." "Watch me," Beyoncé said with a smile, already dialing. She spoke quietly but firmly into the phone, making arrangements that would change Jenny's life forever. When she hung up, she turned back to Jenny. "It's done. The hospital will have the payment by morning." Jenny started crying again, harder this time. "I can't accept this. It's too much." "You can and you will," Beyoncé said firmly. "But I want something in return." "Anything." "Take care of yourself. I mean it. No more pushing yourself to the point of collapse. Your mother needs you healthy and strong." Jenny nodded through her tears. "I promise." "And one more thing," Beyoncé added, reaching into her bag. "Here's my assistant's private number. If you or your mother need anything, and I mean anything, you call, okay?" "Thank you," Jenny managed to say. "How can I ever repay?" "Pay it forward," Beyoncé interrupted. "When you're able, help someone else who needs it. That's how we make the world better." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the vending machine the only sound. Then Jenny asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why? Why help me like this?" Beyoncé's expression softened. "Because someone helped me once when I was young and struggling, and because sometimes the strongest people are the ones who need help the most but never ask for it." Another knock at the door, the security team getting more insistent. Beyoncé stood gracefully, but before leaving, she turned back to Jenny. "Your mother's going to be fine," she said with quiet certainty. "I can feel it. And Jenny?" "Yes?" "Don't forget to rest. The world won't stop spinning if you take a break now and then." With that, she was gone, leaving Jenny sitting on the break room couch with tear-stained cheeks and a piece of paper that would change everything. Outside, she could hear the commotion as Beyoncé left the store, could hear the shouts and camera clicks of the paparazzi who had gathered. Mr. Peterson came back in, still looking slightly dazed. "Jenny, do you want me to call someone to pick you up?" Jenny shook her head, looking down at the phone number in her hand. "No, I need a minute." He nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need, and Jenny, maybe take tomorrow off. Rest." For once, Jenny didn't argue. She sat there in the quiet break room, thinking about angels in designer clothes and miracles that happened at Register 7. Thinking about how sometimes the hardest part of receiving help was learning to accept it. Later that evening, as Jenny sat by her mother's hospital bed, holding her hand and telling her everything that had happened, she realized something important. The story wasn't about meeting Beyoncé, though that was incredible enough. It was about how sometimes the universe conspired to put the right people in the right place at the right time. "It's a miracle," her mother whispered, tears in her eyes as Jenny told her about the payment for her treatment. "No," Jenny replied, squeezing her mother's hand. "It's what happens when people care about each other, when they look past the surface and see what really matters." That night, as Jenny finally allowed herself to truly rest for the first time in months, she thought about what Beyoncé had said about paying it forward. She made a promise to herself that once her mother was better, she would find ways to help others. Because sometimes the biggest miracles come disguised as small acts of kindness in a supermarket on an ordinary afternoon. And somewhere across the city, a global superstar sat in her home studio, thinking about a brave young cashier who had reminded her of what really mattered in life. Because sometimes angels didn't wear wings or halos, sometimes they wore supermarket uniforms and worked too hard trying to save their mothers. The next morning, news headlines blazed across social media. Beyoncé's secret supermarket visit takes unexpected turn, and Queen Bey shows true colors in local market. But Jenny didn't read any of them. She was too busy sitting in Dr. Chen's office, watching in amazement as the doctor confirmed that her mother could start the new treatment immediately. "It's all been arranged," Dr. Chen said, looking both pleased and slightly bewildered. "I received confirmation of full payment this morning. I've never seen anything processed so quickly." Jenny clutched her mother's hand. "When can we start?" "We can begin next week," Dr. Chen replied, smiling. "Your mother's chances with this new treatment are very good, Jenny. Very good indeed." That evening, as Jenny helped her mother settle into bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "How did the doctor's appointment go, B?" Jenny stared at the message, still not quite believing any of this was real. With trembling fingers, she typed back, "Everything's approved. Mom starts treatment next week. I don't know how to thank you." The response came quickly. "Just take care of yourself and your mama. That's all the thanks I need." A week later, Jenny returned to work, this time with a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in months. Mr. Peterson had given her several days off to rest, and for the first time in ages, she'd actually slept through the night. As she tied on her apron and headed to Register 7, Sarah from the deli counter rushed over. "Jenny, did you see? Someone put this up in the break room." In the break room, there was now a small framed photo on the wall. It showed Jenny and Beyoncé sitting together on the break room couch, both smiling at each other, caught in a moment of genuine connection. Below it was a handwritten note. "To the Market Fresh family, thank you for reminding me that the most beautiful moments happen in the most unexpected places. Special thanks to Jenny, who showed me what real strength looks like. Beyoncé." Jenny touched the frame gently, remembering that afternoon that had changed everything. Her mother's treatment was going well. The crushing weight of medical bills had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, she could see hope on the horizon. "Hey, Jenny," Mr. Peterson called from the doorway. "When you have a minute, I'd like to talk about promoting you to supervisor. We need more people like you around here." Jenny smiled, thinking about what Beyoncé had said about paying it forward. Maybe this was where it started, right here at Register 7, where she could help make other people's lives a little bit better, one checkout at a time. Because sometimes the biggest changes in life don't come with fanfare and flashing light. Sometimes they come in quiet moments, in break rooms and at checkout counters, when one person reaches out to another and shows them what really matters.